We are very lucky to have with us live in the studios once again, Bruce Gagnon. Bruce Gagnon has been working on space issues for more than 30 years. He is co-founder and coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. He is a Vietnam-era veteran and began his career working for the United Farm Workers Union in Florida, organizing fruit pickers there. For 15 years, he coordinated the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice and organized the largest peace protest in Florida's history, when over 5,000 people marched on Cape Canaveral in opposition to the first flight test of the Trident II nuclear missile. He is also a member of Veterans for Peace and the author of Come Together Right Now, Organizing Stories from a Fading Empire. Bruce, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us again this morning.
Great to be with you again. Thank you.
So start out, tell us about your organization, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space.
It was created 23 years ago to essentially create a consciousness and to build a movement internationally around the issue of moving the arms race into space. The Pentagon says that if the U.S. can control space and dominate space and deny other countries access to space, that they would be able to essentially control the planet on behalf of corporate globalization. And so we see that today these military satellites give them the ability to intercept all phone, fax, and email communications, the whole NSA Snowden story there. We see them having the ability to target any place on the planet using drones or other weapon systems. And so they're moving ahead quickly with this whole project that, again, they say will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth, making so much money and costing so much. You can imagine building a satellite, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then launching it on rockets, hundreds of millions of dollars. They blow up now and then. You got to start all over again. It's a financial drain. And they've said repeatedly that they've got to come up with a dedicated funding source to pay for all of it. And they say we have. We're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure that funding source. What is it? The entitlement programs, officially, which are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the welfare program. These are the programs that the military-industrial complex has identified to defund. And it's no coincidence that just in recent days, the 15 new incoming Republican senators in Washington have signed a pledge saying that one of their first goals is to dismantle the food stamp program. Imagine that, taking money from the poor and from the children and the elderly, taking food off their tables so that they can pay for these systems of endless war. The Navy, for example, is saying that their budget is unsustainable, that the cost overruns for the new aircraft carriers, the modernization of the Trident submarines out here at Bangor Naval Base, the destroyers made in my community in Bath, Maine, the destroyers that are outfitted with so-called missile defense systems that are key elements in U.S. first strike attack programs. All of these programs are costing so much money now. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter that has all kinds of technical problems. It has so many bells and whistles on it, it doesn't work properly, but it's costing the national treasury, essentially. All these programs are so expensive and so, overrun in cost that they've got to drain social progress. They've got to destroy social progress in America to pay for it, to pay for this endless war. And what is this endless war really about? It's about controlling the planet on behalf of corporate globalization for ultimately resource extraction as fossil fuels decline in availability. Our organization is dedicated to helping people see and come alive around this whole issue of space technology leading and directing modern warfare.
And we should mention that what brought you to town was a peace walk with the members of the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action over next to the Bangor Trident nuclear subbase.
Yes, this previous week, starting on Monday in Olympia, we began walking and walked to Tacoma through Seattle and then out to the Navy base. Yesterday there was a protest at the front gates of the nuclear submarine base, and about 10 people were charged with attempting to, walk into the forbidden area there at the base. It was there was a day-long kind of mini conference held at the Ground Zero Peace Center. It was a wonderful event with music and speakers. So it was a really brilliant day, and I was just proud to come and be a part of it. I'm really have a very close relationship with the Buddhist order Nipponzan Myohoji, which has a temple out on Bainbridge Island, and over many years I've organized walks for them that they've led, both in Florida where I used to live and now Maine where I do live. And actually the a monk from Bainbridge Island, Senji Kaneda, he came the last 2 Octobers to Maine to lead our walks through the state against militarization of our state. And I really wanted to thank him for walking with us, because it adds such an incredible spiritual dimension to our political activism that I wanted to come and join the walk they just did here, the Martin Luther King walk that talked about militarism and social justice. So it was an honor to be a part of that whole walk through your state.
So what do you see as the goals of doing the walks? Are they just for those participating? Are they for those that are seeing you walk by?
Well, let me speak personally about it. I made a sign. My sign said, "Human needs, not wars." And the S is a dollar sign, WAR $S, wars. And so my goal was to make eye contact with every car going by, every person on my right or my left as I walk by, and to turn my sign so that every car and every person could see it. That was my goal. I wanted people to see my message. And so I don't talk much on a walk. I don't, I just really work. I work on a walk. That whole day that we're walking, we were averaging about 13 to 14 miles a day. And so I figure that literally thousands and thousands of people read my sign. I mean, we walked through the heart of Seattle, downtown area, business government district, at midday. There was people all over the place, A lot of people saw my sign. So that's my goal. And, the way I look at it is we're blocked. We're blocked by the corporate-dominated media. We're blocked by the corporate-dominated Congress. There's a filter between the peace movement message and the public. And so walking, guess what? You see everybody, no matter rich, poor, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, age, young or old. You see people, because America, you want to see America, you want to reach America, they're in their car. So get out on the street and walk, and you really have direct contact with the American people. So for me, it's a fabulous way of getting around the obstacles, getting around the corporate arterial blockage, I like to call it, and it works. And you really, you have contact with people.
And so do you do that as a complement to the work you do online? Because I know, for instance, both you and I use Facebook as a tool to get information out, but I'm frustrated a lot in the last several years that I feel most people appear to be shifting towards an online presence as opposed to a presence out in the community.
Well, I think you're talking about collectivists. That people have become collectivists and have given up on being out in the street. That is an issue. I think part of it is age. A lot of the peace movement tends to be older people. But also there's a deep, deep despairing across the land amongst the people who care, who have good hearts. there's a sense of powerlessness because of this corporate arterial blockage of the Congress and of the media. And a lot of people have, in a way, given up. We have severe problems, climate change, growing income disparity, growing poverty, growing debt amongst students, So a lot of people, it's not that they don't care. I never call it apathy, but I call it powerlessness and depression. Dr. Helen Caldicott, we were talking about her before the show. She often talks about how high percentages of American people are on antidepressants. And she says if you're not upset, if you're not angry about all this stuff, then you're not paying attention. So it's a natural reaction to be depressed, but you've got to fight through that depression. I get depressed, you got to fight through it. And for me, walking is really great therapy and great liberation, because I'm beating this mind colonization that they've stuck into my brain, through the corporate media. So I use every tool possible. I use blogging. I have a blog called Organizing Notes. It's kind of my spiritual practice to daily blog. We have a great website, the Global Network, spaceforpeace.org. And, but I try every avenue possible. I think we need all these approaches, but we still have to be public. We still have to connect with our fellow human beings. We still have to touch other people's hearts. We have to understand that as organizers and activists, that the human connection is still, it's got to be a priority for us.
We should clarify, and your website is space4peace.org, right? So, getting back to your organization and a precursor to the creation of your organization and that protest, that largest protest in Florida's history against the Trident II nuclear missile out of Cape Canaveral, a lot of people, including myself up until 10 years or so back, maybe 15, I never realized the U.S. connection in the space program to the Nazis in Germany in World War II. Can you paint that for us?
Right after, right after World War II was over, the U.S. brought about 1,500 former Nazis to this country. About 100 of them were the Nazi rocket scientists that were building the V1 and V2 rockets that Hitler used to terrorize the cities of London and Paris and Brussels near the end of World War II as he was getting desperate, as he was losing. Werner von Braun, the rocket scientist, was brought to essentially create the U.S. space program. Other Nazis were Nazi intelligence that were brought to the U.S. to help create the CIA. Nazi scientists that were doing mind control experiments on the Jews were brought to do the MK Ultra LSD drug experiments of the 60s when people were jumping out of windows because of bad trips. Those were the former Nazi scientists that were running those experiments. And many, many other people. In fact, some years ago, Jane's Defense Weekly, a British military-industrial complex magazine, if you will, one of the writers wrote a book about the black budget, U.S. secret military budget. It's called the black budget, where they store, who knows, nobody knows the exact figure. Even Congress is not allowed to know how much money goes into it, but some people say it's up to $100 billion a year, and they use for secret, top secret military technology development. This writer was trying to figure out where did this secret architecture, this black budget come from, and he traced it back to Operation Paperclip. The Nazis had brought it over. It was a Hitler program that Hitler used to develop his rocket V1 and V2 program and everything else. So, if you imagine seeding the military-industrial complex with the top operatives of Hitler's Nazi regime, answer this question: is there an ideological contamination that comes along with it? My answer is absolutely. And could it not be then that one reason that we are so aggressive with our blitzkrieg endless blitzkrieg around the world is because this is the Nazi program, that the Nazi war to take over the world is not over, that in fact it just leaped the ocean and integrated itself into the U.S. program. And the military empire that we have today is an extension of the Nazi program. There's really good books about this. One of them is called Secret Agenda by Linda Hunt, former reporter with CNN that wrote kind of the definitive study on Operation Paperclip. Many other books about it out there. I highly recommend people learn more about it because it really helps close the circle as we try to understand what's really going on. I know it's hard for the American people to begin to imagine that we've become the Nazis, but in fact it is. It is true. After World War II, one of the guys brought over was Gagnon. Gagnon was the head of Nazi intelligence, and he had what was called a rat line, a team of anti-communist operatives in every major city in Europe. And he went to the Americans at the end of World War II and said, you probably don't want to try me for crimes against humanity. You might want to use me in my rat line. And so they brought him to the U.S., put him through the hoops, made sure that he was for real, and then they sent him back and put him in charge of the new country, West Germany, their intelligence program. So imagine this: the former head of Nazi intelligence, now the head of West German intelligence, and so they've been going at it ever since. This is where we're at today.
I know that some of the scientists brought over in Project Paperclip were also put into U.S. universities. You have to wonder what the trickle down of that operation was.
And we see the militarization of universities today, especially state universities, because of budget cuts in various states. An illustration is University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. They have secret parts of their state-funded campus where the military-industrial complex is doing research for high-tech weapon systems. They're actually fenced off. You can't get to them, but it's on a state-funded university. So we see this militarization of various departments, engineering, nuclear engineering, computer science, a lot of other departments, robotics, mathematics, interplanetary sciences. A lot of those are becoming militarized on the campuses.
I do a yearly FOIA public records request at our local University of Washington, the powerhouse, one of the largest, it might be the largest employer in Seattle. And I know the last several years they've been averaging about $50 million a year in DoD grants.
This is what we do in the world. Some years ago, during the Bush administration, George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of War, there was a C-SPAN program. The speaker was Thomas Barnett, at that time a instructor at the Naval War College. He had written a book called The Pentagon's New Map. And I saw a 3-hour presentation he made to a huge auditorium full of high-level military brass and CIA people. And basically what he said was, under corporate globalization of the world economy, every different country is going to have a different role, a different job. We're not going to make stuff anymore because it's cheaper to move the jobs overseas, very cheap labor in Indonesia, Vietnam, China, etc., India. Our role under corporate globalization is going to be security export. We're going to go out and kill people and control parts of the planet that will benefit corporate globalization. Then they put up a big map and he showed where we're going to go. Middle East, Central America, Afghanistan, and parts of Africa where we are now increasingly today because of resources there, and parts of Latin America, places like Venezuela, that's one of the largest supplies of oil on the planet. And so that's our job, endless war on behalf of corporate interest. And so we've got to begin, the American people have got to begin to understand and see this bigger picture here. This is what we're doing in the world. It's no coincidence that today our number one industrial export product is what? weapons. And when weapons are your number one industrial export product, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line? Endless war, that's right.
So speaking of endless war, talk about what the U.S. is currently doing with Russia and China and other areas of the world.
Well, Russia has the world's largest supply of natural gas, and by now we should know that anybody that has significant supplies of natural gas or oil is going to be deemed an enemy, is going to be demonized, and is going to be surrounded. And so today NATO, a cancerous NATO, is expanding to surround both Russia and China because the U.S. the corporate globalization wants to essentially take them down, control them. They've yet to fully submit to the banking and the oil interests that control most of the planet. And so that's the latest project. And this whole Ukraine situation is a destabilization along Russia's border in order to introduce chaos into Russia. One thing that is happening as a result of climate change is the Arctic ice is melting. And that means that the oil corporations want to go and drill under what was impossible to do before because of Arctic ice. And if you look at a map, you'll see that Russia happens to have the largest landmass along the Arctic Sea. And so one of the goals is to balkanize or break Russia apart. Russia is a huge physical country. It's the largest territorial country on the planet. So they want to bust it up. The Rand Corporation has created a plan that spells out how we're going to bust it up into various pieces. And so this whole situation in Ukraine is an early foray into that strategy. Right now, NATO has moved into Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, right on Russia's border. We're trying to get into Georgia with NATO. Well, I shouldn't use the word we, but NATO is, U.S. and NATO. And, of course, U.S. and NATO led this coup d'etat in Ukraine, and now they've created a civil war there that is forcing Russia on its border to make a decision. What are you going to do about this? It would be the equivalent of Russia or China going into Mexico and Canada, putting bases, creating instability. The United States would freak out over it. I mean, we'd go ballistic. But when we do it to the other side and Putin does anything in response, he gets demonized in the Western media. So it's very, very dangerous. Just this past week, the United States was depositing huge amounts of military equipment into Lithuania. I saw the video. I put it on my blog. There was video of just trainloads of U.S. military equipment going into Lithuania. So Russia is freaking out. They're freaking out, saying, "What the hell are you doing? You're surrounding us. You're moving into our backyard," and it's very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. Most people don't even know what's happening.
And again, it ties back to the history of the U.S. allying itself with the former Nazis with Galen's organization and the role that several of the countries, including Ukraine, had in World War II against then the Soviet Union.
That's right. When Hitler invaded Russia, he went through Ukraine, and in the western part of Ukraine, the part closest to Europe, there was a guy named Stefan Bandera, that was a nationalist and joined forces with Hitler to help invade Russia. And so the Russians remember this. And in the eastern part of Ukraine, closest to the Russian border, the Ukrainian citizens have more connection to Russia. And so that's who the civil war is now, the Nazis, the Banderaites, against the Ukrainian citizens that are closer to the Russian border, that are more ideologically and culturally linked to Russia. And so Russia feels a fear that, these Nazi operatives that are just slaughtering Ukrainian citizens in the eastern part of the country. I mean, oh my God, I've been following it now daily for a long time since this whole coup d'etat happened that the U.S. and EU essentially created. And it's terrible. And, all these refugees have flooded into Russia. Russia has been very, very judicious about reacting to it. And even though they've been accused of invading Ukraine, Russian tanks in Ukraine, it's not true. But this is all part of the demonization that's been going on in order to justify more NATO expansion, more U.S. military moves in the region. It's extremely, extremely dangerous. If the U.S. tried to do this during the Cold War, during the height of the time of the Soviet Union, it would have started a nuclear war. And it very well could now as well.
And as Helen Caldecott points out, there's over a dozen nuclear reactors that are in the Ukraine and in potential hot zones for the current conflict.
Exactly.
So I've left you just about 3 minutes left to tell us what can people do about all this.
Well, I think if you want to stop space warfare, if you want to prevent the next use of nuclear weapons, if you want to prevent endless war, if you want to stop the wars in Iraq and Syria and everywhere else that the United States is doing things, cut the military budget, defend social justice, defend human rights. But as you're doing that, make the links, make the articulation, talk about how the Pentagon has the largest carbon footprint on the earth. Talk about how the Pentagon controls the vast majority of our tax dollars today in the National Treasury. But there are literally two trains heading on a collision course. One is called endless war, and the other one is called social progress. And one of them is going to survive this collision, and one of them is not. And so the question that all of us have to answer is, which train do we want to survive the collision? I think the answer is fairly obvious. And what can we do to help make sure that this Pentagon train gets derailed before this collision really comes to a head? So each of us in our own lives, we've got to find a way to defend Social Security, food stamps, social justice, mental health programs, education programs, all the good things that social progress has brought us. They're all under attack now by these, can I use the word, evil forces that are really running our country and trying to destroy the world. We've all got to become more human. And remember, what's the number one job of a human being on this planet Earth today? I believe it's to give the next generation a chance of life and to protect our relatives in the plant world, the animal world, the natural world. We have a responsibility as humans to look out for all of our relations on this planet and to protect life on this planet. That's what it means to be a human. Let's do that. Work together, hold hands together around the world. I want to congratulate local activists that recently went to Jeju Island in South Korea, where a Navy base is being built that is going to port these submarines from Bangor Naval Base. They went there to link arms with activists in that community. That's what we have to do.
We're talking with Bruce Gagnon. He is co-founder and coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And Bruce, how can people find out more about your organization?
They can go to our blog, spaceforpeace.org, or our website, or go to my blog, which is called Organizing Notes. Just Google Organizing Notes with my name, Bruce Gagnon. You'll find it, and you'll kind of get a daily review of an activist's life.
All right. Well, with that, we're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us again.